open up the camera. Anyway, Monday, as the title says, that is here watching over me getting in the way. Basic Mondays again, push-ups, squats, ab works, and I'll figure out the fourth exercise later. Might do some plyometrics, most likely. I'm just feeling a bit lazy today, like most of my Mondays really. But you know, whatever gets me started. Listen to Andrew here do as usual.
Anyone to get truly cold adapted, some people start to look forward to the cold, and what I think they're looking forward to is the feeling afterward, that dopamine rush. But if you get cold adapted, then it certainly blunts some of the effects.
But I want to be cold adapted because that means I have more mitochondria in my adipose tissue and perhaps even muscle, like that's been shown.
So maybe there's a good opportunity so cold and UCP1, if you could educate us on UCP1, I find this really interesting, and I learned about it from you. So
yeah, so norepinephrine actually released in the plasma, it does act as a hormone. Vasoconstriction is one thing it does, but it also regulates a variety of molecular functions that have to do with adaptation to cold. One happening to be, shivering is a very inefficient way to produce heat, which is what your body's trying to do when it's exposed to cold. And your muscles are basically contracting and producing heat from that, but that's just not very efficient. So the more eloquent way to do it, or elegant, I guess, way to do it is, to basically have your mitochondria produce tons and tons of heat. So the way it does this is by activating a gene called UCP1, uncoupling protein 1. Norepinephrine is upstream of that, activating it. So what that does is essentially, so mitochondria are these little organelles inside of your cells that are responsible for producing energy. Usually that's in the form of adenosine triphosphate, ATP, and that's what lets everything function inside your body, from your neurotransmitter production to your heart beating, etc. However, you can uncouple your mitochondria. Basically, your mitochondria, they're like a little battery. So they have a double membrane. First of all, their structure, but they have a negative charge on the inside, and they have a positive charge on the inner membrane. So in between the outer membrane and the inside part.
Like a neuron.
Like a neuron, yeah. So I guess it's like a neuron. It's like a battery, negative and positive. Well, basically, you can uncouple that charge, and so that positive charge protons start leaking out of the mitochondria, and your mitochondria freak out. So this is called uncoupling, and they start to, it's maximum respiration, as we call it. They try to make as much energy. They're like, I got to get that proton back, that gradient, the electrochemical gradient. And so they just go insane. And they, in this case, it's uncoupled energy. So the energy they're making is actually heat, not ATP. But you're essentially burning substrate. So who cares? You're burning glucose. You're burning lipids. You're basically burning things and making heat. And so that's what uncoupling does, and that is a much more efficient way of producing heat than shivering. So as you become more adapted, maybe the longer duration that you've stayed in the cold, or the more times you've done it, you'll no longer shiver anymore. You will start to then just do this uncoupling type of thermogenesis, as it's called. And another type of adaptation that occurs is you actually produce more mitochondria in your adipose tissue. And that actually happens, also regulated by norepinephrine or noradrenaline, through a protein called PGC1 alpha. And what that protein does is it makes more mitochondria in your adipose cells. So per adipose cell, you're getting more mitochondria. It's a beautiful way to basically make more heat when it's one of those things where it's like, your body's going, okay, I'm going to be exposed to this cold next time. How can I make sure I don't die? Oh, I can have more mitochondria and I'm going to make more heat. And so you're making more mitochondria in your adipose tissue. And this is often referred to as like the browning of fat. And the reason for that is because if you look under a microscope at a lipid droplet, basically a fat cell, not a lipid droplet, an adipocyte, you'll find that it looks darker because there's more mitochondria in there. So it's referred to as browning fat. And so I don't want to get into the whole beige fat brown. There's this whole, I'm sure you've had experts on that talk all about that.
No, not yet. I mean, I always think of white fat, beige fat, brown fat. And beige is kind of intermediate. White can be converted into beige, but
right, and beige can take on thermogenic characteristics essentially. And so, so you can activate beige fat so that it's thermogenic in the sense that it's burning glucose and or fatty acids and producing heat. So the more you expose yourself to cold, the more you can brown your fat, so to speak, and therefore you can tolerate the cold for longer periods, which people do notice, and you can then have the thermogenic qualities of having more brown adipose tissue or beige, activated beige adipose tissue, which is, you'll get a lot of naysayers out there saying, oh, brown fat doesn't regulate metabolism at all. The reality is there's like thousands of researchers trying to pill up brown fat and thermogenic, like they're trying to make it a pill because it does affect metabolism. It's not the only thing. It's certainly, if you're obese and trying to lose weight, you're not gonna like do that just by doing cold exposure. You need to do dietary and exercise changes, predominantly, but it does affect metabolism, and this has been shown in human studies. So it is a interesting it's another possible mechanism for affecting metabolism, and that's in adipose tissue. But you also make more mitochondria in muscle tissue, and this is regulated not by norepinephrine, but it is still PGC1 alpha. Interestingly, not that anyone else really cares, but maybe you do, Andrew.
I'm eating this up.
So PGC1 alpha is response to norepinephrine in adipose tissue to make more mitochondria. But in muscle tissue, it's unclear what the regulator is. Cold exposure does it. So this was shown at least in a couple of studies I've seen where people that were exercising, I believe, or may have been men only that were exercising, did some sort of training, and then did cold water immersion, something like 50 degrees Fahrenheit, 15 minutes, and PGC1 alpha, which is a biomarker for mitochondrial biogenesis, which is the generation of new mitochondria. By the way, that's awesome. You want more mitochondria in your muscle. It's associated with improved muscle mass, improved endurance. I mean, mitochondria are essentially they're making energy in your cell, and we don't make more mitochondria normally. Like, you have certain inputs, high intensity interval training, exercise can do it.
And actually make more mitochondria.
Yes, yeah, and that's been shown in people. And
weight training or just high intensity interval training?
I haven't seen weight training. I've seen it in high intensity interval training, endurance training. But that doesn't mean that it hasn't been shown. I just haven't seen it, or that it hasn't been looked at.
So good to know. I'm always looking for reasons to finally do more HIIT type high intensity interval training work. I do weight training and I do low intensity cardio.
There was a brilliant study by at the time he was a postdoc, Matthew Robinson, and he's now gone on to start his own lab at the University of Oregon Health Science Center.
Great place.
And he did this study where both young and older people they had this whole high intensity protocol, which I can't remember what it was, but their protocol for X amount of time, I'm sure it was at least a month. They then measured biomarkers of mitochondrial biogenesis in their muscle tissue, and the amount of mitochondrial biogenesis in old people specifically, it happened in both young and old from HIIT, from the high intensity interval training, it was like enormous, at least 50%, I think. It was just like, whoa. And so, like, why would you want that? Well, mitochondria, your mitochondria, you don't make your cells are turning over, and you make new cells, you replace old ones with your mitochondria. You don't really do that for the most part. You can. Mitochondrial biogenesis does happen, but you have to stimulate it to happen. And the way your what happens with your mitochondria is they essentially are bobbing around inside of your cells, and they fuse with other mitochondria, exchange all their content, mitochondrial DNA, and then fizz back apart. And that's how they kind of stay youngish. But like, as you age, you keep doing that with the same pool of mitochondria, and you're going to get a bunch of old mitochondria mixing old stuff together, right? So why wouldn't you want to like bring up new, healthy, young mitochondria into that pool, right? So in my mind, when I hear mitochondrial biogenesis, I'm like aging. Like, that's the first thing I think of. So anyways, cold exposure does that.
Amazing.
Other things as well. So.
Please, thank you for offering to somehow filter the level of detail. But I assure you that listeners of this podcast are familiar with drinking from the fire hose of Mechanism, and that was really helpful. And again, this is just one example of maybe 4 or 5 other things that you've said, at least, that are going to inspire me to change my behaviors. I'm going to start doing some high intensity interval training. Dr. Andy Galpin was on this podcast recently, and he told me that the subtle zone 2 cardio and the weight training is great, but that I really should be doing some max heart rate work per week. going into max heart rate for 90 seconds, then resting and repeating that, maybe even mile repeats. I'm just curious, as a brief aside before we talk about heat, what sort of cardiovascular or other types of training do you do? Do you do HIIT? I imagine you are doing high intensity interval training. If you could just give us a sense of the contour of your week as it relates to exercise, and because you've been very gracious in sharing some of what you do for supplements and food, what about exercise?
So it all depends on my week, of course, and what I've got going on with my son and my work schedule. But I do a lot of high intensity interval Tabatas on a stationary cycle. I use Peloton because I just like that instructor there, like telling me what to do, and then me competing with everyone else. I'm like, So it works.
You're revealing something about your psychology. This is good. We just learned about. So this podcast is actually just a decoy for psychological assessment of the guest. No, I'm kidding. But so now we know you're competitive. Good.
Yeah.
That explains a lot of how you got through graduate school and then do what you do. So you're getting on the Peloton, and what does it look like for someone who's not familiar with Peloton? I know what they are, but I've never been on one. You are pedaling against the instructor for how many seconds?
So there's a bunch of people that are online, either doing the class with you at the same time or have all time doing it. So you can kind of toggle on what you want, and like you can try to compete against the all-time
so it's really
number.
Competitive.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
And the instructor is just there to like whip you, like
wow.
Make you. There's a part of the brilliance with Peloton is like I used to do what's called rush cycle, and I used to go in. It's basically you go in and group cycle and have an instructor there, and you do all this high intensity interval training stuff. And I loved it because there was a competitive aspect to it that had me working harder than I would work if it was just me in the room, like without an instructor or anyone there. And it was just like I'm at a gym, any gym, and I'm just on a stationary cycle listening to a podcast, doing something, which is fine if that's your group, right? But there is something about that group setting that kind of holds you accountable too, right? And the Peloton made it somehow virtual. It was amazing. And I remember being back at Rush Cycle, this is before a pandemic, and people talking about Peloton in my class, and I'm like, oh, that's ridiculous. Why would I do that? Like, that's never gonna work. I need to like be here. And then the pandemic hit, and I was like all over the Peloton, and it works for me really well. So I tend to do that at least 3 times a week. Sometimes I do it more, like I'll do 4, and I do a 10-minute. Just 10, because it's efficient and I push my ass. I push myself really hard.
That's the Tabata.
It's 20 seconds on, 10 seconds off, and it's 10 minutes.
And on means you're pedaling like your life depended on it.
You're maxing it.
And there's a lot of resistance
and so
in the
you
pedals?
so you basically, there's a part where I always do resistance. I'm like the power, I do the power for, there's a part where you're sitting cycling and you're trying to go really fast, but I always crank the resistance up. I always go above what they give me. And then there's a part where you're standing and then you really crank the resistance up, which I really do, and like you feel it in your glutes.
It's like going up a hill.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so they like break it up, and most of the time you'll have like those two parts. And I love the efficiency of it. You get it done, and people sometimes hear me go 10 minutes, or really you think you work? And I'm like, look, like you do max Tabata for 10 minutes, and it's intense.
Yeah, most people can't sprint for the gate of an airplane they're about to miss, carrying a backpack. So if I think about that, and then I've just described myself sprinting through the airport and going, all right, Andy Galpin, I got my 90 seconds max heart rate in for you, carrying this thing. But 20 seconds on, 10 seconds off, repeating that over and over for 10 minutes. So by the time you're done, you're cooked.
And then because I'm competitive during the recovery that they give you at the end, I'm pushing it max.
Great.
The number's higher.
Great. So 3 times a week?
Yeah, 3 times a week. And then I always have my sauna on, preheating up. Takes about an hour and a half, and I get it to about 189 degrees Fahrenheit. Mm-hmm. I hop right in the sauna after my Peloton.
So the elevated heart rate continues? Is that the rationale?
I mean, I literally like down a bunch of water, and then I get in, and then I like either read a science paper, or prepare for a presentation or a podcast, or I hash over things in my mind. And it's interesting because something about getting in the sauna, I think the heat stress of it. I started doing the sauna in 2009 in graduate school. Okay, and
you're an early adopter.
I started doing it every day. I lived across the street. I lived in a studio apartment with Dan. We lived in this like small studio apartment, the smallest apartment you could ever imagine. And it was across the street from a YMCA, because I was poor. Right? I was very poor, very poor. I mean, So
I recall. I recall.
Yeah. Okay.
I lived in my lab.
Wow.
But
really?
then again, I lived in my lab as a postdoc, and I admit, I lived in my lab with my bulldog as a faculty member for other reasons.
Okay.
But I get it. When you're a graduate student, you're poor. Basically.
Yes. And so I used to go to the sauna before going into the lab, and I started noticing that I was all of a sudden able to handle stress better, like the stress of my 6-month setback because of a failed experiment, which is crushing, on top of the pressure from my advisor and my own pressure, because I'm very competitive with myself. And
I was going to do 6 sets, but I only do 5.
I was having a hard time. I was very stressed out.
Under the weather.
And the sauna started to
I can move
really
just fine, but
noticeably
it's only when I'm exerting
affect
myself that I'm
my
noticing.
anxiety and my ability to handle stress. And I was like, what is going on here? So I started looking into the literature, and started getting interested in the effects on the brain. And in fact, at the time, I had a friend who was not actually experimentally, but theoretically looking into the
See how I feel.
opioid system. And basically, so when you get in the sauna, you release a lot of endorphins. Endorphins are the feel-good opioids that make you feel good. But you also release something called dynorphin. And dynorphin is an endogenous opioid that binds to a receptor called the kappa opioid receptor, which dynorphin is responsible for that dysphoric feeling when you're in the sauna and you're hot, or when you're running, doing exercise, and you feel uncomfortable. Well, I think that's dynorphin. I'm speaking in absolute. I think it is.
I mean, that there's evidence in alcoholics that some of the symptoms of withdrawal that they experience are related to dynorphin, and dynorphin is known to negatively impact the dopamine receptor system. So basically, it's the feel like garbage pathway.
Right, you feel like garbage, and so you think that would not be good. But this is where my friend that comes in. He was looking at the effects of like treating morphine or heroin addiction, and people that are using those drugs. They basically the endorphins or the morphine or heroin. They bind to a receptor in the brain called the mu opioid receptor. And as they take these drugs, that mu opioid receptor becomes downregulated, and so you need more and more of the drug to feel as good as you did, right? Well, endorphins also bind to that receptor, and he was looking into some of the other drugs that are like salvinorum or something, salvia. It's called. It binds to the opioid receptor. It also makes you kind of feel uncomfortable. Anyways. He had put some studies in front of me that showed basically binding of the, either dynorphin or, whatever ligand to the kappa opioid receptor basically sensitizes the mu opioid receptor to the feel-good endorphins, and also changes, I think it also upregulates it or something. So basically there's a lasting effect of feeling good. So the endorphins that you release later from hugging someone or a joke you're laughing at or whatever, you feel it for longer. Right. And so anyways, this is with respect to the sauna, it's a big sort of hypothesis of mine. I did kind of publish that part of my hypothesis in a review article, but I do wish more people would kind of look into that. It would be amazing. But what I was getting at, I think, was I would use the sauna to memorize things. This is way back in the day, and I still do it. And I wanted to talk to you about this because you're a neuroscientist. That there's something about being in the sauna, and I don't know if it has to do with the stress response, like when you have an emotional trigger, like you remember things better, right? I mean,
absolutely. There is a clear and known explanation for mechanism for this. Yeah.
So in the sauna, I mean, you also release norepinephrine, just like you do in the cold. There's a lot of overlap. I mean, it is a stressor, but I use it to remember things. Like I'm going through something, I want to go through a presentation or a talk or a podcast or whatever, mm-hmm. and I go in that sauna, and I mean, you should try it, like if you haven't already. I don't know if you have.
I have a sauna and a cold plunge now, and I haven't tried I read books in the sauna in the evening. It's a time I insist on having my phone out of there, mostly because I thought I'd cook the phone, but also just to get some separation from the phone and screens in the evening. So I read books. The only challenge sometimes is you're dripping sweat onto the books, but I'm willing to forego a few pages of a book. The idea that being in this semi-stressful environment would aid in the learning and retention of information is really well substantiated by this beautiful work by a guy named James McGaugh. I don't know if his lab's still active, but he was at UC Irvine for a while, and then I think at University of Arizona as well. They have a great memory group at both places, very strong in learning and memory, both places. And he was the one that really defined this kind of inverted U-shaped function for the relationship between adrenaline and memory. Basically, if you're too relaxed and not stressed enough, you're not going to remember any information. At peak levels of stress, you actually are a memory machine, at least within the context of whatever it is you're trying to learn. So very well, what you're describing is very well matches with that. And then of course it tapers off as you really increase adrenaline to the point where people are starting to lose autonomic function, where they're panicking basically. But obviously you're keeping it in range. The other thing that I'd like to ask you about is in the sauna, of course, there's vasodilation, and perfusion of blood to the brain is a wonderful way to enhance cognition. There's even some really nice data showing that during inhales, as opposed to exhales, people are better at learning information. Believe it or not, during the inhale, you're taking in and absorbing and remembering more than during the exhales. And these are beautiful studies done in humans, of course. So I can imagine that vasodilation, getting more perfusion of blood to the brain, plus a little bit of stress, or maybe a lot of stress from the epinephrine. And yet and then of course there's going to be I don't want to call it placebo, but there's going to be the context, the conditioned place context of it. Like if we had a good experience remembering something in the sauna once, the positive association effect of that location is real. Just like if people go to a new city and they get robbed, like if you go to Cincinnati, I've never been to Cincinnati, but you get robbed in Cincinnati, your purse gets taken, your wallet gets taken, you kind of hate Cincinnati as a tourist. But that could happen in any number of different cities, right? The opposite is also true. So if something good happens someplace, so I'm imagining that it's a combination of those effects. But it would be very hard to do this in the cold. I feel like the cold is a very potent I think it takes you too far down that curve, the McGaugh curve.
I have to sing songs or something when I'm
distract
yourself.
Oh
yeah, I sing songs.
Yeah. But afterward, you're very efficient at learning.
After I am. And with respect to the sauna, the vasodilation does occur, so there's a lot of overlap between moderate intensity aerobic exercise and heat stress. And as you can imagine, when you're exercising, you're elevating your core body temperature, you're sweating. And when you're actually in the sauna, blood does get redistributed to the skin to facilitate sweating. But much like exercise, blood flow in general is improved to the brain, to the muscles, everywhere. So, I think generally speaking that, and this, there's studies showing that sauna use is associated with a much lower risk of dementia and Alzheimer's disease. Like people that use it 4 to 7 times a week have greater than 60% reduction in dementia and Alzheimer's disease risk compared to once.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. You said people who use it, I apologize, but maybe you could tell us again. People who use it 4 to 7 times per week
they have a greater than 60% reduction in dementia risk and Alzheimer's disease risk compared to people that use it only 1 time a week. People that use it 2 to 3 times a week have something like a little greater than 20% reduction in risk. There's a dose-dependent effect on dementia risk and Alzheimer's disease risk. It also has a profound, there's a big link between the cardiovascular system and the brain. Obviously, blood flow, a big one, right? You need to get blood to your brain. But cardiovascular mortality, so mortality from cardiovascular disease, if people use, or actually this was men, if men use the sauna 4 to 7 times a week, it's a 50% reduction in cardiovascular related mortality compared to 1 time a week. Again, dose-dependent manner, 2 to 3 times a week is something like 24% lower death from cardiovascular disease. There's also lower, sudden cardiac deaths, like heart attack. That's like 60-something, greater than 60% lower if men use it 4 to 7 times a week versus once. Again, a dose-dependent thing. And the thing that's so profound there also to me, when, again, looking at the methods, when I look at the data, and this is all work from Dr. Jari Laukkanen. He's in the University of Eastern Finland and just one of the world's experts on sauna use, especially with respect to cardiovascular health. What some of his data has also shown is that if you look at the duration, the time spent in the sauna, so a lot of so I mentioned the temperature I do like 189 degrees Fahrenheit. Typically I go in there, I'm pretty heat adapted. And so the more you do the sauna or any sort of heat stress, whether it's a hot tub or jacuzzi, you become adapted. You're basically starting to sweat at a lower core body temperature to cool yourself down. all these sort of physiological changes start to happen earlier. And so I stay in for like 30 minutes. So I stay in a long time. That's a lot. You have to listen to your body. Most of the studies that I just talked about were from the duration, the time spent in the sauna. When I said 50% reduction in cardiovascular disease related death, what was shown was that men that were in the sauna for only 11 minutes, even if they used it 4 to 7 times a week, that reduction was only like 8% instead of 50. It had to be greater than 19 minutes. So like 20 minutes is the sweet spot at about 174 degrees Fahrenheit. And so, and most of the saunas in Finland, by the way, they're humid. So they put they put water on hot rocks to create steam. And so it's usually between 10 to 20% humidity in the Finnish sauna. So those studies were, I would say, most of the time you're going to find that their humidity is also elevated. But to me, the dose dependent nature of it and the duration, knowing, like, to me, that's a very strong data that this is more causal than some, corollary thing, because that's always the problem with observational studies, including these, which they corrected for a whole host of factors like cholesterol, exercise, just everything under the sun. I mean, they corrected for those. And on top of that, you have the dose dependent nature of the duration, the time spent in the sauna, and the frequency. So to me, it's like something's going on here. Yeah. Plus, there's been studies, intervention studies, where it's like, comparing directly head to head moderate or intensity aerobic exercise on a stationary cycle to 20 minutes in a sauna. They're physiologically the same things happen. So heart rate elevates while you're doing the activity, blood pressure increases while you're doing the activity, but then after, heart rate decreases, resting heart rate decreases below baseline, blood pressure is improved, so it decreases below baseline. This is happening the same in moderate intensity cycling versus sauna. So again, this sauna, like this heat stress, there's something about it that really mimics this moderate intensity aerobic exercise, which is really great for people that can't go for a run, that can't even get on a bike. So, disabled people, granted, there are some safety concerns, they're pretty mild, but they do exist. So people that had a recent heart attack or have some rare kind of heart disease or problem, drinking alcohol, never do that. Elderly people, prone to low blood pressure, always talk to a physician before doing the sauna. It is stressful. Pregnant women, oh yeah, I definitely avoided saunas when I was pregnant. But it is, I think it's very relevant for disabled people and also people like that are sedentary. I've been sedentary most of her life. Like my mother, I've been able to get her in the sauna because she's not, I did get her on the Peloton once, but it's really much easier. She feels like it's a spa treatment, and it's like she can listen to her music in there, and like I care about her health, but she's mostly been a sedentary person. And so I find it much easier to convince her to get in the sauna than to get on Peloton. Ideally, you do both. The question would be, well, I exercise, I run, I do my high intensity interval training. Why do I need to get in the sauna? And the reality is and so I published all this in a review in the Experimental Gerontology last year, I guess, or late last year. And it basically, cardiorespiratory fitness, which is a marker of health. Cardiorespiratory fitness is improved in people that do exercise and sauna compared to exercise alone or sauna alone. So for those healthy, fit people out there already exercising, there's a synergistic effect by also adding a sauna into that routine. And to me, that's great. And there's so many beneficial things happening with the heat stress. In addition to like mimicking aerobic exercise, there's the heat shock proteins that we talked about earlier. And those, it kind of brings me back to my early days of science when I was at the Salk Institute for Biological Studies doing research on little nematode worms that we or someone else injected amyloid beta 42, the peptide, the 42 amino acid peptide that is involved in amyloid plaques found in the brain, correlated with Alzheimer's disease and other brain disorders. We injected those into the muscle tissue of worms, and basically these worms become paralyzed with age because the aggregated proteins, these proteins aggregate. Well, heat shock proteins, one of the main things they do is they basically make sure the proteins inside of your cells maintain their proper three-dimensional structure and are folded right, and so they're not prone to aggregating. and forming these plaques in your arteries and also in the brain.
Legs.
And there's back to my worm studies I was doing, I would elevate heat shock proteins in these worms, and it would totally, correct the problem where they would no longer become paralyzed. They'd move around like they were young. So many animal studies have been done looking at Alzheimer's disease, like a human-like Alzheimer's disease in a rodent, and heat shock proteins protecting from it. So heat shock proteins are robustly activated in humans, and this has been shown to even 50% higher over baseline levels after just 30 minutes at 163 degrees Fahrenheit in the sauna. So and they stay activated at least in rodents for 48 hours at least. So having these heat shock proteins around, making sure they're properly taking care of our proteins so they're not aggregating in our brains and in our plaques could be another potential way that sauna is protecting from Alzheimer's disease and other cardiovascular health, as well as longevity. So there's people that have SNPs in heat shock protein factor 70 that if they have one of them, so they got one from their parents where they have more active heat shock protein 70, they live on average 1 year longer than people that don't have that SNP. And if they have two versions, if they got one from their mom and one from their dad, they live on average 2 years longer than people that don't have that SNP. So it's also been associated with human longevity as well as in lower organisms. So you can heat shock a worm or a fly and they live 15% longer. This is work done by Gordon Lithgow at the Buck Institute years and years ago. So anyways, I guess what I was getting at was the heat shock proteins are part of that stress response pathway that we talked about earlier. And, they're also activated by cold as well. Cold shock does activate heat shock proteins. Not as robust. Sulforaphane activates them. Again, it's one of the reasons I think we should get all of these things because they're more robust inputs. Their input activating mechanisms are more robust for, different ones. So there is crosstalk. There is, I guess it'd be more accurate to say there's overlap. But it's also like you want to get the most robust from all of them, right? I do. So, that's why I want to do the sauna and exercise and eat myself, my broccoli sprouts and all that stuff. So.
Oh, it's super interesting. A couple of questions came up for me. One is you mentioned these SNPs, these nucleotide repeats, basically genes that some people have more of or less of than others that can predict longevity in some sense. Is that the FOXO3 pathway?
That's one that can. Yeah, FOXO3 is, in fact, if you go back to the worm studies I was talking about, that was like one of the first things when you see it with your own eyes. You can take these worms that you basically decrease their insulin signaling pathway and their IGF-1. Worms have what are called homologous genes, so they have a lot of similarities to humans. They have an insulin-like receptor, they have an IGF-1-like receptor, and they make something like FOXO3, which we have. And basically, if you decrease that insulin signaling pathway, their FOXO3 is always active in those worms, and they live like 100% longer. And not only do they live longer, they are like a very young worm. They are like, you look at this thing and you're like, this looks like the worm that was just born like hours ago. What's going on? This thing's at the end of its life. Now, as a side note, the thing that always got me on this was, by the way, this was discovered by Cynthia Kenyon, and this was like back in the 90s. And honestly, I'm not sure that anything has been as exciting in the worm world since then, but I thought, it was a really big finding. The only caveat there is that the worms go through this dower. It's called a dower stage when this happens, when you decrease their insulin signaling and stuff. And they like go into this like metabolic stasis, like they're not eating as much or moving, and so it's like, okay, well, they live 100% longer, but like they go into this weird state.
I know people like this, some in the longevity community. They know who they are, but they'll get the last laugh because I'll be dead, well fed but dead, and they'll still be going. So in terms of the many data on sauna, and I also just want to acknowledge these Finnish groups that did this work. Is really pioneering, right? When you think 20 years ago, long before social media or any of this, and they're up there, I should say, measuring cortisol and growth hormone and all this stuff in people getting in now sauna. Very, very interesting. So 20 minutes seems like the threshold at 170 degrees Fahrenheit. more times per week seems to be better than fewer when in terms of all-cause mortality, cardiovascular risk, according to what I just learned from you.
4 would be a good, I think, minimum effective dose.
4 times a week, and you combine it with the cold. I've also seen a protocol where it's a very extreme protocol. I don't recommend this to people right off the bat, where they had human subjects get into the sauna for 30 minutes, get out for 5, 30 minutes, get out for 5, 30 minutes, for a total of 2 hours of exposure. But that was what led to these massive 16-fold increases in growth hormone. I actually have and they had to do it very seldom. So it sounds like these protocols you're describing, 20 minutes done 4 times per week, are far more reasonable for most people to access. But I know people are probably desperate to know, what if they don't have a sauna? You know, a sauna is kind of a unique item. So I have a couple questions. Can people use hot baths? And with the appropriate warning, of course, that without getting into a description of the mechanics and the underlying biology, it's pretty obvious that the testes, if they get too warm, you'll kill sperm. That's the reason why the testes are housed in a structure called the scrotum that can move around. So just to be, here we are biologists just talking about realities here. So if you're trying to conceive children or keep your sperm healthy, guys should probably stay out of warm, hot baths.
For at least 6 months. That's been shown. So
6 months.
So sperm motility goes down and sperm production goes down, but that is completely corrected if they stay out of the sauna for 6 months. So through 6 months later, it's back to normal.
Great. That's very useful information, I'm sure, to a number of people out there. So if people don't have access to a sauna, and we get this about cold too, people always say, what about cold showers? And I always say, well, the studies have mainly been done on immersion, because it's hard to keep things controlled in cold showers. It just doesn't make for a very good experiment, because you get a bigger person, less of them is under the shower, and so it doesn't make for a good experiment. So it's not as good as immersion. But with heat, I could imagine that a hot bath would work almost as well.
Yeah, so there's been some studies looking at, for example, activation of heat shock proteins, also brain-derived neurotrophic factor increases with heat stress. And so the hot bath at around 104 degrees Fahrenheit, which is typically what studies will use for temperature, which is actually cooler than when I crank my bath hot. It's so hot.
But you're very heat adapted.
I'm very heat adapted, yeah. And it's 20 minutes from the shoulders down. And that is like a very robust activation in heat shock proteins and in brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And then heat shock proteins are also protecting against muscle atrophy. So that's also having to do with the protein structure in the muscle tissue as well. And this has been studies in animal data, as well as some recent human data, as well as local hyperthermia or local heat treatment. But essentially it showed that it protected. I mean, it was like, there was a study where they were looking at muscle disuse, and it was something like the local heat treatment prevented like almost 40% of the muscle atrophy from disuse. So like, and it's funny because I used to use the sauna when I was injured and stuff. I would go in the sauna because I didn't know at the time, because I was a graduate student, but I knew like just from experiments that like I'm not losing as much muscle. I feel better. Like at the time I was reading all about the growth hormone and stuff back then, but and I knew about heat shock proteins, and so I kind of knew, but that data wasn't around yet, and so now we have the data, and I've always like felt like I wasn't losing my muscle like I should have been when I was doing the sauna, and I was doing it literally 7 days a week. It was like hardcore. This
is also during graduate school.
Yeah, now I'm doing the sauna. Like a bare minimum, I do 3, but I try to do 4 because of it all depends on the schedule. I also like to do long runs. It's like long being like 3 miles, not like Cam Hanes long. But I really, for me, and we were talking about this earlier, like off camera, that the runs for me are for my brain, and I get this mind wandering effect where I daydream and I think about things. I work through problems. I get creative. I come up with ideas, and this is all happening on the runs. And so I miss my runs if I don't do them, and I miss it because of the brain effects I get from it. And when I exercise, it's funny because I'm female, and you think that I'd be exercising, to stay fit and in shape and care about my figure. But when I exercise, literally what I'm thinking about is my brain, and I'm like, this is the best longevity drug there is. This is it right here, Rhonda. Like you're always wondering, you're always wanting to know, you're wanting to do the best. Like if you don't exercise, you're missing that essential dose. And so that for me is the motivation, the dopamine seeking thing I'm looking for. Admittedly, I do not do enough strength training, and I have to do it. Have to. I'm so after the endurance and the hit, and I really need to add that in because muscle mass is also extremely important for aging as well.
It's all about balance.
That's my fault.
Well, the brain effects are really interesting. I also run. I try and get one longer run per week and a few other runs, and I do it without a phone. I don't listen to podcasts. I occasionally will listen to music, but I really try not to. I also find that my mind solves problems. I feel like it washes out the cobwebs, so to speak. Some of the most brilliant and prolific neuroscientists that I know who have very long careers, crunches. Eric Kendall.
Luckily, I'm doing them right now, so
for all his work on memory. Used to swim a mile a day, and now I think swims half a mile a day. But he's in his late 90s, and he's still sharp, which is incredible. And his lab has done some work showing that any load-bearing exercise repeated, so endurance work, unlike the Peloton or cycling, that's really load-bearing, although you're cycling really hard with the resistance, but causes the release of osteocalcin from the bones, which acts in an endocrine way. It's sort of like a hormone. It can actually travel to the hippocampus and at least in these animal studies, induce the proliferation of neurons, growth of synapses, BDNF, a number of downstream things, which kind of makes sense if we were to put a just so evolutionary story on this. A body that's active can signal to the brain that the body still needs cognition. An inactive body in some ways is depriving the brain of any signal of what the body is doing, right? This is obviously, I'm making this up as conjecture, but we know in various ocean animals that they'll swim around for some period of their life, and then they'll have a completely stationary portion of their life, and basically the brain degenerates. You don't need much of a nervous system if you're not moving. So I think there's really something there, and also just letting the ideas in mind drift. I love that and I appreciate that you shared your protocols, because I think right now we're in an interesting time in public health information history where people are just kind of getting bombarded with cold is good, heat is cold. Cold is good, heat is good. Excuse me, I misspoke. There are all these micronutrients, and of course macronutrients are important too. And today you've really enriched us with the description of the underlying mechanisms and the logic behind them, but also sharing what you do is really informative, because I think people need a jumping off place, and obviously they need to start someplace, and getting heat adapted, et cetera, takes time. But I really appreciate that you're willing to share your protocols, and that you do the things that you teach and educate people about. As a final question, because I have to ask, red light sauna or no red light sauna? I've been a little bit vocal about my feelings that none of the red light saunas I've ever been in got hot enough, and it was frustrating. So I feel like it's neither here nor there. However, I do acknowledge that red light and low-level light therapies are now known to do a number of interesting things. There was a Nobel Prize in 1908 for phototherapy for lupus. So, it's not like a new thing, the idea that red light and light could do things positive for our biology. But do you have a red light in your sauna? Do you think it's useful? And I mention this because this is the number one question I get about sauna: red light or no red light, or some intermediate answer.
So I don't have an infrared sauna, but I do have, I have a sauna that has lights. It makes red light, but I don't think it's the red light that you're talking about.
Okay.
It's not activating it at a specific wavelength, which is...
It's usually, so the range that seems to be helpful, and I confess I use a red light panel for other things, is 670 nanometer out to about 720 nanometer. So it looks like red and very dim light, dim red and bright red. And the idea is that red light can travel, the photon and energy is such that it can travel down through the deep layers of the dermis of the skin.
I don't have a red light in my sauna. I don't know if it's essential or not. I don't think so, based on all the studies I've talked about. I think that would be the potential effect on mitochondria is interesting. I do think there's a lack of really good solid evidence in humans, but might only be because it's just not studied enough, and that's usually the case. So perhaps there's the Joovv, right? The Joovv, they have those red light panels.
Joovv and Cozy are the two ones I know. KOZE and Joovv. As far as I know, I'm probably going to insult both companies at the same time, but I'd rather insult them both at the same time than just compliment one or insult one. Both of them seem excellent for getting the appropriate wavelengths of red light, and I do not have a relationship to either of those.
Yeah. Well, I personally think that the sauna in and of itself, it's about the heat stress. And typically the question I get is infrared sauna or regular sauna. And there are some differences as well. Infrared saunas, maybe the infrared saunas are the ones that have the red light that you're talking about. Infrared saunas only get up to around 140 degrees Fahrenheit. So as I mentioned, the studies were about 174 degrees Fahrenheit. And so you really have to stay in a longer period of time. However, there have been some studies coming out of Japan. They use infrared sauna. They have this whole protocol. It's called Wei-on therapy, and they get people in infrared saunas and they wrap them in a towel and like they stay warm for X amount. So it's like the whole protocol ends up being like an hour long. But it's 140 degrees Fahrenheit, so it's an infrared sauna, and it's been shown to improve a variety of like coronary heart disease and conditions, heart-related conditions. Like there have been some improvements. So obviously there's evidence that infrared saunas can be beneficial for cardiovascular health. I've used infrared saunas many times at my in-laws. They have an infrared sauna, and I have to crank that thing up for a while until it's maxed. And then I have to sit in there for an hour at least. I do sweat a lot, and that's another thing we didn't talk about. You do sweat some heavy metals, and some heavy metals are excreted predominantly through sweat and others through urine. So for example, cadmium, there's like 125-fold increase in cadmium excretion from sweat when you get in the sauna. Also lead is something like 17-fold excretion is higher. Another one is aluminum. It's about 4-fold higher. So infrared, you do sweat a lot too, and that's because the main difference is that you're heating your body up through thermal radiation versus the ambient air. Like a standard, sauna is a heater, and the heater is heating up the air, and that's how you're heating yourself up. So it is a little bit of a different mechanism. I prefer regular saunas. Most of the data out there is from the heat stress itself, like your heart rate's elevating when you're in there. You're feeling hot. You're getting that cardiovascular. That's what you're feeling when you're in a hot sauna. And that for me takes a really long time in the infrared sauna. I get at the very end. But I do think there are some benefits from infrared, and they are more affordable. They're less of a fire hazard. But again, hot baths are, I think, a good alternative modality for heat stress compared to like a regular sauna. So
great, that's a really helpful answer. Like I said, I use the red light, but not in the sauna, and thank you for reminding us of that 174 degree Fahrenheit threshold that was mainly used in all these studies. So we covered a lot of territory, but I just want to thank you again. It was extremely thorough and extremely informative. I now have my notes are always look a little bit like they were drawn out by a macaque monkey who has no knowledge of the English language, but I can decipher this to tell you that there are at least 10 additions to my current protocols that I'm going to add, and I'll have lots of questions, so I apologize in advance for that. But on behalf of the listeners and just directly from me, thank you so much for your time. I learned a ton.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on. It was really awesome conversation, so I enjoyed it a lot.
Let's do it again.
Totally.
Great. Thank you for joining me for my discussion with Dr. Rhonda Patrick. I hope you found it as interesting and as actionable as I did. Once again, if you'd like to learn more about Dr. Patrick's work, sign up for her newsletter, and to listen to her excellent podcast, go to foundmyfitness.com. You'll find links to the newsletter as well as the podcast there, or you can go direct to the podcast by going to Found My Fitness on YouTube, Found My Fitness on Apple, or Found My Fitness on Spotify. And once again, the newsletter is foundmyfitness.com/newsletter. If you're enjoying and or learning from the Huberman Lab podcast, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's a terrific zero-cost way to support us. In addition, please subscribe to the podcast on both.
Got a frog face going on. Why are you wearing a frog? Why is the frog so sad? To me, this is a guy that could be.
Alright, workout's done. Now I'm gonna slide into my stretches. So it's just something I can place in the background while I do this.
This video is sponsored by Fabulous. I don't... This video is brought to you by Squarespace. Stick around until the end of the video to learn more about an offer they're making available through my channel. So guys, I've been feeling a little bit burned out lately. Now I know how sympathetic and supportive you guys all are. You're always sending me supportive messages anyways, so I can already hear you down in the comments sending your messages of support, and it's greatly appreciated. However, that said, it's not really necessary, because I've been burned out before, I'll be burned out again, and it's kind of normal, and that's one of the purposes of me wanting to make this video, just to normalize being burned out and say that it is okay from time to time to need to take a break. And that's especially true if you're someone who works hard, but also if you're someone who trains hard, because training is a stressor, and any stressor is going to make it easier for you to get burned out. If you're training really hard in the gym, then eventually it's highly likely you're going to lose some motivation. But this kind of happens in cycles. It's almost like seasons. You'll get periods where you're really into your training and you feel really revved up and you can't wait to get in the gym, you're busting through PRs all the time. Then you're going to have periods where you just don't really feel like it. But like I said, I'm not really worried. It's happened before, it'll happen again, and I know that I'll bounce back, and I know some things I can do to help myself bounce back. That's another purpose of this video. I thought it could be a kind of learning opportunity. We can talk a little bit about burnout, what's actually going on, and how we can combat it. Not only prevent it, but also come back from it stronger. And I think that's probably the key to focus on. That, by the way, is not to belittle or undermine anyone else's experience of burnout. I'm not trying to say like, hey, I'm going to deal with it just fine, so you should too, because the point is burnout's different for everybody, different from case to case, and in some cases it can be really severe. It can lead to things like depression. It can be a really big issue. So also don't feel bad if you don't bounce back from burnout. But again, that's where it can be useful to learn a bit more about it and see how best we can tackle it. So if you're interested in just learning the strategies to prevent and deal with burnout, then you can skip forwards. I'll put a timestamp. However, if you do want to hear a little bit of context on what's going on for me personally, then stick around and I'll give you that context, because I'm trying to be more conversational and chatty and open on the channel. So for me, the biggest thing that's been making me feel absolutely spent is my son, who is 11 months old, and he's going through a sleep regression. For the non-parents watching, the sleep regression basically means that they unlearn, they forget all the stuff that they've learned about sleep. So Alex, that's my son, has actually been the best sleeper you could possibly ask for. He learned to sleep for the night after about 3 weeks, which is really, really good, and he puts himself to sleep, which again is unheard of. My daughter was much, much more difficult. But lately, for the last 2.5 weeks, he's been waking up at 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, and not putting himself back to sleep. And also, you can't put him back to sleep. So you wake up with him at that time, and then that's the time that you're awake from. I try and hug him on the sofa and get him to sleep, but he crawls around and cries. Then you end up sitting on the floor, so he crawls around, and you just look like this. My wife and I obviously take it in turns, but that still means that every other night we're getting, 4 hours sleep max. And it does affect the one who's still asleep. This is taking its toll. 4 hours or 5 hours on average every single night is not enough, and over 3 weeks it's really started to get too much. He's actually coping quite well with not sleeping, but he's definitely more tetchy than usual. And because he's just learning to stand up, this means that he's lifting himself up on everything and falling over and hurting himself. So you have to be on him every single minute, except my daughter also wants to play all the time, she wants your attention all the time. So when it's just one of us, it's nigh on impossible. So that's happening. Then at the same time, I've injured my lower back, and actually did that after I made the video saying everyone gets injured. So that's true as well. Often these things go hand in hand, burnout and injury. You injure yourself because you're feeling a bit burned out, or you're feeling a bit injured and that makes you feel burned out. In this case, I had a slightly achy back. I knew it was a bit risky. Then I swung my daughter around the car as a joke, flew her into the seat, hurt it a bit more. Kind of doing okay with it. I've been doing a lot of stuff to work on my lower back strength, and it would have been fine, I think, but I needed to film a deadlift for a video I was making, and I'd already written the script, I'd already told the client, the sponsor, that it was going to be in soon, so I had no option but to film this. And I thought, well, if I just load up some light weights, it'll possibly be okay. So I went in, did my light deadlift, and still hurt my lower back. I felt it go, and I also needed some videos of squats, and I didn't really have much footage of either of those exercises, so I really had to do it. So even with this bad back, I then did the squats, and then it really ached. So I'm also limping around, sleeping worse because my back hurts. And again, this has happened before, and I know how to recover from these things, and I could have avoided it if my job wasn't to train even when I'm feeling exhausted, and if I didn't have to lift a really heavy kid in and out of a cot, which is like you bend over the cot and you lower them down. It's essentially a jet
Sleepy,
ski.
I forgot about your 20 crunches.
The bars are in the way. It's brutal. At 2 o'clock in the morning with a bad back when you're so tired. Yeah, it's an accident waiting to happen, and it did happen. I do actually have a genetic tendency towards lower back pain and strain. Specifically, this might be to do with a variant of the COMT gene, and I found this by looking at Self-Decode, a service that analyzes your DNA. I'll put a link to that in the description down below if you're interested to find out. If you do go ahead and use that, then I'll get a commission, so thank you very much. Even without that though, the writing has been very much on the wall. My Oma, which is German for grandma, she had crippling back pain and was bedbound in her later years. My mum has extremely bad back pain, and yeah, it keeps happening to me as well, so it seems like it runs in the family. My goal, of course, is to combat my genetic destiny, and to be honest, I'm pretty confident I can do this. This leaves me in a bit of a tricky position, because I've got to make these videos on a weekly basis, and often they involve like clapping press-ups and handsprings and walking on my hands, and I've got this really bad back, and whilst I have to do those things, there's only so many videos I can make where I'm not actually lifting anything or doing any push-ups as a fitness channel, so that's been a bit of a challenge. And that's the other thing, I love this channel so much, I love my job, I've got the best job in the world, you guys are amazing, and I love making this content. It was my dream to get paid to work out. And I also wanted to be a programmer and someone who wrote about science, and I managed to somehow do all those things in one job, which has just been awesome. But it's actually quite stressful because it's going so well, I'm getting respect from people that I highly admire on YouTube. I'm getting noticed in the streets, and I'm just like, I can't believe this is happening.
I've got this cool big office, but at the same time, I'm like, I don't want to mess this up. I don't want it to go wrong. And I'm highly, highly aware that I'm now responsible for my family's holding income because my wife is a stay-at-home mum. And at the same time, if I mess up, then I've kind of like screwed the best job in the world. And I just keep thinking the next video is going to be the one where I say something stupid, and suddenly everyone realizes that they don't want to follow me anymore. Yeah, that's a bit of stress. And then on top of that, I've got these sponsors, which is fantastic because it's guaranteed income during a very uncertain economy. And I'm extremely grateful. I love all the sponsors I work with, and they've been fantastic. But just the fact that I've got to get these videos to them now on time with a deadline, and I have to hand it into them before I want to publish because they need to check it and then send it back. And then on top of making the video itself, I have to make the integration, which is an added challenge. So it's become a bit more like being employed rather than self-employed. Obviously, I am self-employed, but I now have to meet demands and things, send emails, which is all the stuff I'm not terribly good at. I'm more of a creative type and someone who likes doing push-ups. I'm also working on my new print book, which is amazing, but it's an additional stress. I had to hand in the first draft last month, and that was a big rush with all the videos I had to finish as well. So yeah, it's been really rapidly ticking over, and it's kind of like you have to rush, but you also need to make sure you do it perfectly. And I like to try and get home, 4:30 p.m. every day to spend more time with my kids before they go to bed. I like to get home for lunch, and I drive my daughter to and from preschool. I don't want to compromise any of those things, because to me, that's the most important stuff. But it does mean that I have a limited amount of time. I don't be working into the evening and not seeing my family, so I don't do that. But it then means I have to cram an awful lot, and I'm stressed all the time, and maybe not psychologically present as I could be. So, none of this is to complain. I know that a lot of people have much harder jobs, and like I say, this is just something that happens every now and then. It gets too much, it builds up, and something snaps. Also got a few things going on in my personal life that aren't mine to talk about here necessarily. So yeah, it just all kind of has come to a point where I'm like, you know what, this is starting to feel a little bit too much. And so yeah, that's what I would call burnout. Haven't been able to train because of the bad back combined with low energy and no sleep, missing emails, kind of losing a little bit of the creative passion that I have for the job, and I just need to take a step back. And if you're someone for whom working out is a big part of your identity, if you train a lot, then this kind of makes burnout a little bit worse, because not only are you going to burn out faster because you're knackered from the gym all the time, fatiguing your nervous system, creating like literal damage in your body that you then have to repair with sleep, but at the same time, you also need the energy to take to the gym, and if you don't have that energy and the workouts aren't as good, then you're going to feel, a bit low because you had a bad workout, and it's kind of, again, a vicious cycle. And it can be a mistake to ignore it or to power through because you won't recover that way because you're not giving your body a chance to recover, and at the same time you might get injured worse, as I did. That was my bad. So what can we do instead?
I really don't know how I want us to be with this sort of thing, to be honest, but let's try something new. So I've also actually been going through a little bit of anxiety for the first time in my life, and I think the reason is just having kids because, they're so delicate and precious and you don't want anything to happen to them, but they're also sick all the time. And, every time one of them gets a cough or every time one of them has a weird rash, like today, it kind of sends me through this spiral.
Firstly, something to think about is you can't separate your life outside of the gym from the gym when it comes to things like burnout and overtraining. I've heard it said that, professional athletes do all this crazy training and the military do all this crazy training, so how can you be possibly overtrained? If they're not getting overtrained, then you're not getting overtrained. A typical gym rat is not going to be overtrained. Sounds logical. The truth is that it really depends on what you're doing outside of the gym. Because these professional athletes, that's their job. They train, but they also treat their recovery like their job, and they take that just as seriously, things like sleep and nutrition. And they don't have another job on top of it, usually, often, to do, not at the pro level. At the same time, the military, whilst, they're going to be particularly burned out and stressed, they actually are trained for that. That's one of the goals of military training. They also select for that. This is another issue. It's also individual, and you might be someone who copes better with high levels of stress or someone who doesn't cope as well. And unfortunately, if you don't cope as well, it's actually going to be a bigger challenge for you to get into shape because you're going to keep burning yourself out. So this is also something to consider. Different people produce different levels of neurotransmitters. For example, one study looked at the highest performing military personnel and athletes and found that they typically had differing levels of DHEA and neuropeptide Y. And this would actually buffer the effects of acute stress on the hippocampus, allowing them to retain some of their higher level, higher order cognitive function even under extreme stress. Your hormones also play a big role. If you produce a lot of testosterone, then this is going to have an impact. And methods to try and improve testosterone to a significant degree are relatively ineffectual. You might raise your testosterone by 1 or 2% if you're lucky, but that's not going to make a big difference to the way you feel. Unless you're taking steroids or something else, you're really stuck with what you've got, pretty much, I'm afraid. So don't think that you can't be burned out, because you can, and you can be overtrained. At the same time, think about what you're doing outside of your workouts. If your workouts are suffering and you're not recovering, then it might be because you're a physical labourer who works really hard outside of the gym and isn't actually recovering, or you might even be a parent who has a very heavy kid who constantly needs bobbing up and down, or you might just be extremely stressed in terms of emotional stress at work, and this can also prevent you from recovering properly. You might have poor sleep, you might walk a lot. Alternatively, you might have the perfect scenario for recovery. So if you want to avoid burnout, and if you are wondering what caused the burnout, then take a look at your personal life and try and find ways that you can make it a little bit easier. At the same time, I would just say accommodate these kind of cycles and these periods of enthusiasm and drive, and these periods of relative malaise and low energy. As you guys know, I believe in training every single day, and that can just mean holding a deep squat for a bit, or going for a long walk, or juggling to improve hand-eye coordination. There's lots of ways to challenge yourself, whether it's physical or cognitive, and these can all be seen as a form of training. It's important to stay active to some degree, because otherwise you kind of get stuck in such a rut. You get so unused to activity that the thought of activity becomes even worse. And as I talked about in my video on feeling tired all the time, if you move, it actually encourages blood flow, releases more neurotransmitters, generally helps to G you up and get you going. Sometimes I go into what's kind of like a survival mode with my training, where I'm doing just the bare minimum to maintain what I've already got, or maintenance mode, that probably works better. So instead of trying to make gains and push through barriers all the time, it's okay to sometimes just try and maintain what you've got. And as we know, and Jeff Nippard did a fantastic video on this, what you need to do to maintain muscle and strength is far lesser compared to what you need to do to get it in the first place. In fact, one workout a week, according to some studies, can significantly slow down muscle loss and may even be enough to basically maintain it. Remember, you always regain muscle faster than you built it in the first place anyways, thanks to some more permanent adaptations like myonuclei and satellite cells. These are permanent changes that will benefit you for the long run, so you come back stronger quicker. So as long as you're doing this kind of minimum amount of training, that's not pushing yourself or breaking yourself down, but just stimulating the muscles, getting blood in there and keeping those neural pathways alive, then with just one workout or 2 workouts a week, relatively minor, you'll maintain most of your muscle mass. So you don't need to stress about losing it, because if you're stressing about that, it's just going to add to burnout and the feelings of kind of malaise that you get around burnout. Obviously, we want to try and promote sleep as much as possible during these times, and that's going to be easier or harder depending on your situation. I would love to promote sleep, but it's not really an option. But what you can do is go for like nice scenic walks, which have many other relaxing benefits. You can meditate, which is fantastic for burnout, fantastic for developing hardiness and your ability to cope with stressful times. I would say in general, getting into nature and going for walks, particularly if you spend time with good friends, is a great way to unwind and to let your body relax and to really rejuvenate, especially if you spend a lot of time sitting in front of the screen, working for deadlines and things. This is just a break from all that, and sometimes a change is as good as a break. I was actually fortunate that a holiday we had planned coincided with this period of burnout, so I've just been to a really nice Rye with some friends, and we stayed there for a few days, went to the beach, it was lovely. Unfortunately, my son still woke up at 2 and 3 in the morning, and I still had a bad back, and my wife got really sick, so it wasn't like a break in the traditional sense. Parents don't get to go on holiday, but it was still, like I say, a change, and it was wholesome, and I made an effort not to think about work, and it has helped, and I'm feeling a lot better, and just a nice walk can have a similar effect, as can meditation. Something else that can help is the right supplements. Obviously, protein shake can be really useful here because you need to provide yourself with the building blocks to build back the muscle. At the same time, we can look at things that are going to improve your sleep. I find that magnesium threonate is particularly good for me. This is also great for brain plasticity and for relaxing the muscle. At the same time, inositol could, in theory, be really useful. This has been shown to increase the density of neurotransmitter receptors. So in other words, the parts of the brain that receive the neurotransmitters, things like dopamine, serotonin, etc., will be replenished and built up, and this is great, because one of the things that seems to correlate with burnout is a decrease in neurotransmitter activity, particularly the catecholamine neurotransmitters, so things like dopamine, norepinephrine. And so if you have low levels of these things, then by taking inositol, you might increase your ability to use what's available. If you have a lot of these neurotransmitters flowing through your brain because you're feeling really energized, and because you're really hitting it at the gym and you're really doing a lot of work, then your brain becomes used to those high levels and actually reduces the number of neurotransmitters, and then it's like you need a bigger high to get that same feeling of being energized. So that makes a lot of sense as to why you might go through kind of cycles, because you have too much of those neurotransmitters, you reduce your ability to produce them and to be affected by them, and so then you feel down and low, and then your body slowly ramps them back up again. And these days, as we all know, we have way too much dopaminergic activity because of our smartphones, computer games, television, advertising, etc. So it's even easier for this to happen. This is a little bit of speculation. I'm taking some studies and then running with it, but it makes sense that inositol might help. Some people are worried that inositol is going to raise their estrogen levels because it comes from soy, but again, your ability to affect those levels is very, very limited, and there's so many other things that affect them. You're not going to notice any downsides here. As an interesting aside, Bruce Lee took inositol. Similarly, you might try phosphatidylserine. I'm sorry if I'm butchering the name there. I read a lot, I don't hear a lot, so it might be a mispronunciation, but this can increase the production of those neurotransmitters. So you're increasing the production of those things, you're increasing your ability to act on these things, to be affected by those things. Could just be a really nice stack there. Lots of studies show that phosphatidylserine can be useful for combating symptoms of adrenal fatigue. And it's even been shown in one study to help to combat acute stress induced by exercise. And then the researchers speculated that this might mean that over time it could help to buffer the negative impact of training too much and becoming stressed that way. So in other words, it might protect you against overtraining. We can also take things like creatine and omega-3 fatty acid just to boost our energy levels as well. I recommend that you play around with this. I'm not saying it's going to instantly cure burnout, but it has worked for me in the past, and I do notice the difference when I'm using them. I'm using them right now, and it's helping to feel a little bit better. I think could be placebo. Who knows? Something else that can really help is to find something that you're passionate about again. So often we get burned out because we're stressed out, but we don't really have the passion. So this applies to training. If you're doing the same workout over and over again, you're not really enjoying it, you're just going through the motions, but pushing yourself harder and harder just because. If you find something that really excites you, do some reading, whether it means switching to a different style, whether that's calisthenics or powerlifting, or whether it means just trying a new exercise, if you can kind of get the passion back for it and the interest so that you're cognitively engaged in what you're doing, not just physically, then this can make a big difference as well. When you're starting to get back into the flow, something that really helps for me is to think psyched up, not psyched out. So in other words, instead of trying to comfort yourself the whole time, which I think is great to start with when you need to back off, but eventually you're just kind of feeding into your own misery and almost reinforcing that behavior. What you can do instead is to see this as a challenge. So everyone likes an underdog, and if you're feeling a bit tired and miserable and achy, then this is a great chance to dig deeper and prove to yourself that you've got what it takes to bounce back stronger. Ultimately, it may well be that your ability to weather the storm and to cope when you're feeling burned out or overtrained, whether it's to do with training or with life, is the biggest determinant in the end of your longevity and your ultimate success. Because if you give up as soon as the going gets tough, then you're going to stop doing the things you love and you're going to stop progressing. If you just maintain yourself until you can regain that enthusiasm and energy, then you'll be absolutely fine and you'll keep moving on up. You might take one step back and 2 steps forwards, but you're still moving forwards overall, and that's what really matters. With that said, if you don't find that your burnout is improving, if these things aren't helping, then it's extremely important that you speak to a professional and get professional help, because burnout is not a small matter. If it gets much worse, it can lead to things like depression, and it'll be much, much harder to nip in the bud ultimately. So yeah, try these things. Like I say, burnout is normal, so don't fret about it, but if it gets really bad, then do speak to someone. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Like I say, there's so many factors that go into it. Everybody's different, so don't worry about what other people think. Just do what's best for you and your goals in the long term. So yeah, don't worry too much. If you occasionally lose a bit of motivation, it's fine to. You don't have to push yourself through it and just grin and bear it. It's fine to step back, have a deload week, have a deload month, and to just take it a bit easier. And if you go into kind of maintenance mode, you can maintain most of what you've gained, and it'll certainly be much easier to get it back anyways when you return to the gym. And actually taking that break can sometimes be a great way to bust through plateaus. So if you found this video useful and interesting, guys, something a little bit different, I've tried to keep it relatively minimal in terms of the visuals, just to go along with the theme of burnout. Let me know in the comments down below if you get burned out, how you deal with it, etc. And if you are feeling a bit burned out, then welcome to the club. Good luck, and I hope you come back stronger soon. Thank you so much for watching this one, guys, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.
Good news though, guys. After filming this and editing it, I must say I have been feeling an awful lot better. Still exhausted. I was up at 3 o'clock this very morning, but I am feeling, my back is 90% better. Going to go a little bit easy on it still for a while, but you'll see me doing 1-armed push-ups most likely next week, and I imagine I'll be back to normal then. At the same time, I'm also feeling a bit of my mojo coming back. I don't know if that's because of the supplements, very possibly, or it might just be because I've had a bit more inspiration with my videos. I've had a few new ideas, and I'm kind of excited for the channel again. So, like I say, it goes in cycles, and I wasn't
Morning,
worried.
Lisa from Taiwan.
On the up. These sleep regressions don't last forever, so hopefully I'll be back at it.
Cheers for joining.
Power very
Do you
soon.
exercise or
Lots of
anything
really
like
cool and
that?
exciting stuff coming to the channel actually, so stay tuned for that. In fact, I'm off to go and film some of it now.
Speaking of sponsors that I'm incredibly grateful to work with, Squarespace has sponsored this video, and I'm incredibly happy to say that they will be sponsoring many more over the next year. Working with Squarespace is actually as stress-free as possible because they're highly creative focused, and I massively appreciate that. I also love working with Squarespace because they provide a really genuinely useful product.
A competitor in a bot. She's got a frog face going on. Why are you wearing a frog? Why is the frog so sad? To me, this is a guy that could be a competitor in a bodybuilding or classic physique competition. And if this guy's actually natural, that
Cheers,
is
Lisa. Much
ridiculously
appreciated.
amazing. Perhaps 1 million genetics.
So talented but lazy.
Coach Greg, and in
I'm
today's
not trying to
video,
describe
I'm gonna
myself
answer
that way,
all
but I am
questions
lazy.
and giving you my body fat assessments.
Not
And
sure about the
first
talented
up,
part, though.
body age 24, looking amazing. She's 5'4", 121 pounds. She said she's 21% body fat. It's a little higher, 21%, very lean. We would see a lot more definition to this, closer to 24% body fat, and her goal in a year to get to 17%. To me, that's very low. 17%
Well, whether you're a
body
baller
fat
or not, I'm
is
not too
contest
sure, but in
shape
my
for
thing, I'm
most
from
bikini
Sydney,
competitors.
Australia.
And so, to me, a little unrealistic to maintain such a lean physique. 18
What
to
part of Taiwan are you
22%
from?
body
I've
fat
only ever been
is
there
the body
once.
fat of elite level female athletes. We're talking Olympic athletes. And so to maintain a body fat percentage even lower than that, to me, not something I'd suggest.
Yeah, I might have to turn the mic
She
up.
asks, how frequently should I do cardio to
From
reach
Sydney,
my goal?
Australia.
The answer is minimum 150 minutes.
Do you do
of
any
cardio.
training yourself?
And essentially, the more the better.
After I do this
And
stretch,
so
I'll
won't be
adjust
too
the
much
mic and
cardio? Well,
whatnot.
it depends.
Until then.
The harder you do cardio, the less you have to do. The easier you do it, the more you can do. Rule of thumb, if you're sore from cardio, you're doing too much, you're going too hard, back off a little bit. But if you're not sore, you can do more. Up next, Chang, age 37, looks absolutely incredible. 5'7", 160 pounds. His goal is to get to 10 to 12% body fat. He says he's about 15%. To me, a little bit leaner than that, close to 13%. He has a lot of muscle, great shape. To me, this is a guy that could be a competitor in a bodybuilding or classic physique competition. He wants to know how to diet and train during the cutting phase to keep as much muscle as possible. He's not using any supplements whatsoever. And so the key is to lose the weight very slowly. You only have a couple of percentage points to lose. And so try not
That's
to
right,
lose it
Lisa.
very quickly.
Australia.
Half a pound a week. Take your time. Don't do anything differently. The way you train.
Do you do any training yourself, Lisa?
Doing it. It's clearly working. Have a small calorie deficit, perhaps 250 calories a day. You don't need a huge deficit. Slowly lose the weight. You're going to keep the muscle and look amazing. Up next, Michael, age 29, 5'9", 85 kilograms, 187 pounds.
You play badminton 3 times a week, solid cardio. It's very good. I used to play badminton in high school.
Clearly single-digit body fat.
Very fun sport.
Stand up, posing on stage, looking
I used to play with a state champion, and he used to just play with me, literally play with me. In the sense that I had no idea what I was doing against him. But it was very good though. It was very good.
Do I have a chance to turn pro? Well, his goal for next year is to go up to 220 pounds at 10% body fat. Considering he's 187 pounds now at 8%, to me, the only way that that's humanly possible is if he's natural now and goes on performance-enhancing drugs.
That means what you want to take care of are your knees,
Well,
Lisa.
natural now and goes
Like
on
in any
steroids
racket
and puts
sport,
on 30+
or
pounds.
single sides where you're only using one side of your body,
Problem is
where you're only using like sort of
very
rotational
long.
forces.
To do that, he would
You want to
need
be
add
careful
on
because you have like a bit of a crisscross thing
25
going on where you might only have one side of your lower back that's in pain and one side of your shoulder.
Steroids. That is going to be very hard to do.
But then the next thing you want to look into is your knees. Because you're always stopping and starting. You're moving, stopping and starting, changing directions. Our bodies are great at moving forwards, backwards and sideways. But once you move in that direction and you add rotation to the mix, that's where you can get injured and that's where you want to be careful. So make sure to take care of your legs. I recommend looking up some exercises from a guy named Knees Over Toes guys on Instagram. Amazing stuff. But if not,
She's got a frog face going on. Why are you wearing a frog? Why is the frog so sad? This frog shouldn't be sad. She's looking
if not,
incredible.
just do
She
some
looks
link
great.
single leg
She's
stands.
on 26% body fat, so all
It'll be
she
good
needs
to work up your
is training,
stabilizer
more muscle.
tendons and
Perhaps in the
ligaments.
future she'll become a bikini
Just to give you
competitor.
that little bit more support.
Very realistic. She wants to go down to 24% in 6 months. She can absolutely do that. Small calorie deficit, no problem. She can reach her goals. And so she says her main problem is she can't feel her back. and
So a
back
simple
when she
exercise
trains.
for you,
She
whether you
wants
know
to
it
do
already or
something
not,
different.
I just like giving
So my
advice,
advice, get a two-way
is do a single leg stand.
mirror in the back and front
You
so
stand
that
on one
can
leg,
see what your back
ankle,
is doing.
knee in front
Stare in the
of the
mirror
single
and
leg
you can
stand
see your
and then just
back
stand.
moving.
That's it.
And so from
Stand
the
for about
front,
30
you train your
seconds.
front muscles, shoulders,
And if that
chest,
gets too
abs,
easy,
so on.
close your
It's
eyes.
easy.
Once you
You
close
see
your
what
eyes, you take out
But
one
in
of the
the back,
mechanisms
you
that
can't
helps you
see
with
it.
balance.
And
And
so
the more
you
harder
look
you
in
have to
the mirror,
balance,
you're in the
the
front,
more
you're
your
in
body
the
has to
back,
try to
you
maintain
can
and
see it.
stabilize itself.
You look into the mirror, you see the back of
So
the
make
mirror.
sure to
And
always
so
have
you
like a
look
chair or
down
something
the
near you when you do
chin,
this.
you can see the
So
muscles.
progress-wise, standing one leg, eyes open, 30 seconds. Do both legs. If that gets too easy, eyes closed. If that gets too easy,
20 minutes
eyes
in,
back open and stand on a
you
pillow.
have
Now you're on
a
an
greater
uneven
mind-muscle
surface.
connection. You
If
can
that gets too
feel and
easy,
see the
same
muscles
thing,
moving.
eyes
So
closed.
please give that a try.
Simple
Up
way to
next,
manage your
Tom
stability,
Webb,
but also
80
strengthen your knee
17
stabilizers,
years of age. This guy
just to
is
prevent
shredded.
injury.
6 feet tall, 149 pounds. He's
Oh, it's
only
up
been
to-
training for 1.5 years, and look at this guy. He self-assessed him to be at 10% body fat, but this guy closer to 8.5%. And the only reason he's not leaner is because he doesn't have
Yeah,
a lot of muscle.
thoroughly loved playing badminton when I was playing it through high school. A few of my friends still play it from Singapore and Taiwan as well. It's a typical Asian sport, but it's a really good one too. Whether it be badminton, table tennis,
you're going
or
to have half
tennis.
as much body fat percentage at 300 pounds than you did at 150. And so if this guy keeps the same amount of fat and puts on muscle as he gets older, he's only 17. Imagine how much leaner he's going to be. And so I strongly discourage this guy from doing a diet. To me, he should eat in a calorie surplus, go on a lean bulk. And then later on, a couple years, if the guy wants to compete, well, by all means do so. And people
Yeah,
here in North
he's
America,
adorable.
they think they got it tough. They have no idea.
He knows how to get his way,
Kids hardly studied at all.
but he's a very
This
cheeky
guy
cat.
wakes up at 6:50
He loves
every
attention.
morning and goes to school until 10 p.m.
Well, I guess like most
Not
cats,
10 in the
well, not
morning,
all cats,
10
but
at
still.
night. He has
loves
less
attention.
than 1 hour a day to train because he's busy studying, working on his future. And yet, look at the quality of physique. And so rather than finding excuses, well, I don't have time to train. I got to study all day. He's saying, I still can make an hour a day to train. And
You
so
seem
he
to
asked,
be,
what frequency
you and all my
intensity
friends and
should
everyone
train
that
at
meets
to put on
Cheddar.
the most amount of muscle? And his goal, he
You
just
notice
wants
the
to
white
put on
socks
5
more than
pounds
I
a
do,
year.
but everyone notices the
Very
white socks. I'm
realistic.
just like,
I
okay.
think he can do that.
I've had
in
cats my
some-
whole life, so I
he's
guess I must be
been training for a year and a
desensitized to it.
half. He has newbie gains he can make. Just needs to go in a slight calorie surplus, gain more muscle, and I think in a year he could be 160 pounds. And so because he has limited time, I would suggest he trains 6 days a week and divides his body into 3 separate days. That will allow him to train each body part twice a week. And the intensity he should train at, well, harder than last time. And so
You can follow him on
how does that
Instagram if you
exactly?
like. I'm trying to
Harder
get him
than
to
the
pay the
time
rent, that's
before.
why.
And so whatever you were doing, go a little bit
But
harder.
plenty more
If you're
photos on
sore,
there if you
well,
like cats.
You went too hard, but if you're not sore, you
I
can
was not
work a little
counting.
bit more.
Gosh, I had
There is
another
such
30
a thing
seconds
as
for this.
overtraining. You can in fact train too hard, and so please balance out your workouts. Try to train harder than last time, but not so hard that you're always sore. And just look at this guy's physique. He's shredded. The legs, the back looks incredible. This guy gonna have a future in bodybuilding, no doubt in my mind. And so there you have it. You know what to do. If you want to lose weight, gain weight, please follow me, subscribe, click the bell button, write a comment for the algorithm. Please try watching 1 or 2 bloops, the top or the bottom. Use code Greg to get 10% off of any of the HCLT supplements. Also, the cookbooks, the coaching plans. Subscribe, click the bell button, comment for the algorithm.
I don't think I listened to a single thing on that video.
Coach Greg, and in today's video, eat less, move more. Apparently, it's all bullshit. It's bad advice that it doesn't work.
You have to be in a negative caloric state in order to lose weight, and thus you should exercise more to increase that caloric expenditure and eat less to reduce the caloric intake. It just doesn't play out that way.
And so people are saying it's not just about calories in, calories out, to eat less and move more, that there's so many other factors.
So today I wanted to talk about why I think the notion of move more, eat less is kind of a lot of BS.
And so why are so many people saying that it's not as simple as eating less and moving more? If so many people are saying it's not true, how could it possibly be true?
So all diets are successful in the short term, but what people forget is that calories out don't keep stable.
And what the real problem is, it's not that that doesn't work, it's that many people don't know how to do that.
So then the next time you go on a calorie reduction diet and you drop your calories down to 1200, well, now it's not working as well. Well, that's because your basal metabolic rate is lower now. You have to drop your calories even lower.
But people are saying, no, it's not as simple as that because your body compensates. If you do a bunch of cardio, say you burn off 500 calories, your body's just going to compensate and conserve energy and
I think
not
that's my
burn
lower
as
limits.
many
Oh, yeah, one
calories
more.
off and going to make you hungrier. And so why bother? Well, I'll tell you why. Because it only compensates by approximately 50%. And so what does that mean? Well, if you're about my size, a little over 190, you walk 4 miles, you're going to burn off 500 calories. 500. If you kept off 500 calories, you would burn a pound a week. For a year, that's over 50 pounds of fat. And you're thinking, well, I'll try that. And you go and do it, and you don't lose 50 pounds. You're thinking, why? That doesn't make sense. If it was simple as calories in, calories out, the math works out. I should have lost 52 pounds a year, but I didn't. And so proof the calories in, calories out doesn't work. It's not proof. And so what happens is the body senses that you burn off all these calories and increases hunger signals, ghrelin, makes you want to eat a little bit more. It makes it a bit harder to put the fork down. And so perhaps instead of eating an entire plate of food, you eat a plate and a quarter, a little bit more, to make up for some of those calories you burned. That's fine, no problem, because you're still in a deficit. And what about the compensation in calories burned? Well, since you just walked 4 miles, your body's now a little bit tired, and so you're now more likely to sit on the couch and watch TV, to relax, to avoid doing other things that demand a lot of physical activity because you're tired and you're trying to conserve energy and relax. Also fine because you are still going to be in a deficit. And the beauty of this is, the more in shape you are, the more you do cardio on a regular basis, the healthier and fitter you are, the less your body needs to compensate. And so consider this example. Coach Greg and another rider who's never ridden a bike before, we go for a 1 hour ride 30 kilometers an hour, I burn off 800 calories and say, that was fun, I enjoyed that, I feel good. Get off the bike and I feel energized. The other rider is hardly able to move. They're like, are you kidding me? I'm dead, I'm sore, I can hardly walk now, because they're not fit. And so who do you think is going to burn more calories off after the bike race? The person who's in shape, who feels energized from the ride, or the person who's tired dead because they're not used to doing cardio? And so if you do year-round cardio, not only will you burn off more calories during your exercise session, you also will have more energy after to continue to burn calories. And so if you add in cardio into your exercise routine right now, for example, a 4-mile walk, and you weigh about 190, you're going to burn about 500 calories. And so the end result of adding in a 500 calorie exercise session is your body will probably be in a 250 calorie deficit at the end of the day. You have to consider that your body will move less, perhaps you'll eat more, and so what will the end result be? Well, by simply adding in this cardio, you will on average burn approximately 1/2 pound of fat a week over the course of a year. That's 26 pounds of fat simply by doing the cardio. And so you may have expected to lose 52 pounds and it results in only 26, and so you're saying it's not calories in, calories out. It didn't work. Of course it did. It's still following the laws of thermodynamics. It's only that you're conserving more energy because you're not moving as much, or that you're consuming more calories by eating more. It's still calories in, calories out. If you balance out the equation and you're still in a 250 calorie deficit at the end of the day, you will still lose fat. The third thing you should do is lift weights. If you add on 10 pounds of muscle, which most people can do, your BMR will increase by 80 calories a day doing nothing. That's just sitting around doing nothing. And on average, it will be 200 calories if you consider NEAT, the non-exercise activity thermogenesis. That is the amount of calories you burn throughout the day through movement, laying around, doing your thing, just going about your normal day routine. And so many people are saying it's not worth it. 10 pounds of muscle, it's 80 calories, it's 1 apple. Listen, there's more to an apple a day than keeping the doctor away. If you factor in the extra calories you're going to burn during NEAT, just think of it. You have more muscle, you're lifting heavier weights in the gym, you're walking further, you're stronger, you're moving your body around, which weighs more. May not be in the first year, but if you continue to train, you progressive overload, you train harder than last time, you can boost your metabolism, build muscle, not only improve your aesthetics, but also your heart, your health. You're going to be a much better butter burner. And so you might be thinking, why is it so easy for some people? Some people, they got it made, it's gymnastics. That person, they're just a fat burning machine. They can eat all the pizza they want, they never gain weight. Versus you look at the pizza and you gain weight. Well, why do you think that is? If your friend is an athlete, they're doing cardio and they have muscle, think of how many calories they're burning off in a day. If they have 10 pounds of muscle more than you, 200 calories. Add to that the fact that they regularly do cardio, they're burning off 500 calories in, say, 30 minutes. That's 700 calories a day already compared to you burning nothing. And so that's 700 extra calories. Imagine being able to eat an additional 700 calories every day. You know how easy your diet would be? 700 extra calories for nothing. Imagine what you could do with that. But oh, it's not worth it. I'd rather just sit down, watch TV, love myself because I'm overweight and I need an excuse and blame it on my hormones. Or you can start lifting weights, doing cardio, doing the things that you need to do to be healthy and live a longer and healthier life.
Still continuing my stretches.
Actionable steps, things you can do right now, right after this video's done.
Only diff now is I'm doing the rest of it seated because that's how I do my stretches. Cheddar is here to distract me, but
it's that simple. If you avoid eating and say, no, I'll just put it off till supper, you will have a rising ghrelin, the hunger hormone, and it can cause you to binge and overeat calories later in the day. How often have you gone the entire day hardly eating anything, thinking, wow, I did so great, only to binge and splurge and eat thousands of calories at night? That ever happened to you? Well, if you don't want it to happen, eat when you're hungry. And so for most people, eating approximately 3 to 5 meals a day, that is optimal.
Anything more than that, not really.
G'day, Goji Berry. How are you
The
today?
more often you eat, the more you have to put the fork down. Every time
I don't know
you
if
eat
G
something,
Shreds is
you
a
have to
drink or
stop
something that
eating.
you're trying to
And
promote.
So for most people, eating 3 to 5 meals
Or
a
a
day,
new term that I've
spread
never
throughout the
heard
day,
of.
that is the best way to stay
Or just being
full,
shredded is
avoid
if
being
that's what
hungry,
you're saying.
and staying on your diet. Next, drink more water and or non-nutritive sweetened beverages. Enough with the regular pop, juices, and so on. Switch to diet. There's nothing wrong with using artificial sweeteners, and in fact, research supports the fact that those who consume these beverages are more likely to lose the weight, keep it off for the rest of their life. Now, there are some people that say, no, it makes them hungrier and so on, but for the most part, this is not true. And so if you're not sure what to do, please
Oh, Greg
switch
just
from
said.
having regular pops and sodas to drinking diet. Next,
Is that what you
eat more
mean?
protein,
Apologies.
preferably 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. Protein has a higher thermic effect.
The guy seems to know what he's talking
than
about,
fats,
so
and your
I
body
like listening to
burns
some of
off
his
more
stuff.
calories trying
He's
to
got some gold
convert
nuggets in there once in a
protein to
while.
store body fat. Not only that, protein is also more satiating, and so when you're eating protein, you're less likely to be hungry, to get cravings for other foods, and so with a high protein diet,
There's a
lot
few
easier
fitness
to
content
stay on your
creators that I
diet,
follow,
and
actually.
will, in fact, burn off more calories. Next, get some kind of a fitness tracker that can track how many steps you're doing. That can motivate you to walk more. Perhaps you'll park further away from the store, or you'll
Sorry, I
move
live in the
around
bubble,
your house,
Goji
and
Berry.
set
I just
your
assume
goal
no
to
one else
walk
watches
8
this stuff
to
besides myself.
12,000 steps a day. Obviously, the higher the better, but any amount of steps more than you're doing right now will ensure that you're burning off more calories. The more steps you take, the more calories you burn, and also studies show that those who are walking 12,000 steps a day live longer and are leaner than those who walk fewer steps. Another simple one, sleep more. When you're sleeping, you can't be eating. And if you think that you're going to just stay up later to burn off more calories, this is not a good move. When you sleep less, you have increased cortisol, and the result is you're more hungry. More hungry,
And you're more
than
stressed.
calorie surplus, you gain weight. And so those who can get the proper amount of sleep, much more likely to lose weight and keep it off. And if you're having trouble sleeping, consider taking something like melatonin, or you could get My Delta Sleep. These are products that can help you get to sleep faster and
Careful
get a
with
better,
melatonin.
restful night of sleep, which can make a huge difference.
I don't ever use melatonin if you're getting over sleep deprivation. No, not sleep deprivation, but like sort of like jumping in between time zones and whatnot. Not what you want to be using if you're just trying to get regular sleep, especially if you have insomnia. Best way is to shut up all the lights and let your body produce its own melatonin. What was up to?
Hey, you're pretty full. You have that stretch action in the stomach, and that causes you to feel full, less likely to eat. Second reason is caffeine is a stimulant, and stimulants that cause you to have more energy, and with more energy, you're going to move more. Whether it's fidgeting or doing cardio at a faster pace, or just simply having the energy to go about your day. And so rather than perhaps napping the afternoon away, you drink coffee, get some energy, go for a walk, and so the result is you will burn off more calories consuming coffee than without. Just don't drink coffee too close to bedtime, as consuming caffeine too late in the day, that can negatively affect the quality of your sleep. What about alcohol? You can still drink, just be smart in the choices you're making. Rather than having regular beer, which has a bunch of extra carbs, choose light beer, which has hardly any carbs. Calorie difference is about 50 per beer, and so depending on how many beers you drink in a year, that can make a significant difference. Also, be careful when drinking cocktails, and the mixes that are added to the alcohol oftentimes are high in fat and sugars, and so the calories in the alcohol is not so much the alcohol itself, which has 7 calories per gram, but what it's mixed in. The orange juice, cranberry juice, whatever you're drinking, make sure it's low in calories. Next up, keep the junk food out of sight. Out of sight, out of mind. Every time you see food that you like, your body is having a signal to go and eat it. It's normal. It's about evolution. We've evolved to see food that we like and to want to consume it. But every time you see that food, you have to use your willpower to not eat it. And so rather than relying on willpower all the time, just keep the junk food out of the house, or at least hide it from your sight. That way, it's a lot easier to stay in control. Next, this is so easy. Just start eating more fruits and vegetables. I don't care what kind, just do it. Just start eating more of them. How many people that weigh over 400 pounds you think got there from eating too many apples? None.
Fun
Zero.
fact, I don't
None.
eat about
And
95%
so
of
the more
fruits.
fruits and vegetables you eat, the less of the
But I do
junk
eat my
that
vegetables,
room
though.
for, and therefore the fewer calories you're going to have in your diet in the end of the
Smells
day.
my voice is still
And it's
gone. I'm
always
getting over
gonna
the
be
sickness over the
calories in,
weekend.
calories out. And so by consuming more fruits and vegetables,
But then
you
other
will
reasons for that too.
ultimately consume fewer calories. Next, choose lower fat cuts of meats and low fat dairy products. And why? Well, because fat has the highest calorie density, 9 calories per gram in comparison to 4 in carbs and or protein. And so by choosing lower fat cuts of meat and dairy products, you are decreasing the calories in the foods that you're eating. If you decrease calories, you're in a deficit, you're going to lose weight. Next up, it's not just about eating fewer calories, it's about burning more of them off. And so if you join an activity that you enjoy and you do so with friends that you want to participate with, there's a greater chance you will continue to do these activities. If you do it alone,
how are you today anyway, Goji Berry? Doing any training?
But if you have friends that you can share the joy of this activity with, you're a lot more likely to show up. And so find an activity that you find fun, that you can move around.
And anyone else that you follow in
and
particular?
do it with other people. And last but not least, get my... Where is this freaking book? Why isn't it sitting there all the time? Get my freaking cookbook, the hard copy. It's available. Close to 200 recipes. Low calorie, high protein, high volume meals for the big eater. Just one meal, just one swap in an entire day. That's the only thing you need to do. That one meal lower in calories is enough to put you in a calorie deficit. You're going to lose weight. Not only that, you're going to lose it and keep it off. Remember, 95% of diets fail. This is not a diet. It's a way of life. It's the forever diet. The diet where you're not hungry, you're eating what you want, and you're simply losing the weight because calories in, calories out. You're in a deficit, you're going to lose weight. Hope the video helped. Ending it here. You want to get the cookbooks, the supplements, harder than last time, training books, all kinds of stuff, the Circle Diet book? Click the link in the description. Want a free training program close to 20 pages? Join my newsletter list. Get a free training program. Click the link in the description. Subscribe, click the bell button, comment for the algo. Check out my website, GregDoucette.com. Follow me on Instagram, Greg Doucette, IFBB Pro. And until next time, I'm out.
The person that runs the house. Anyway, that's it for today. Those are the stretches. I think I stretched out everything. That was my workout this morning too. Super basic. Push-ups, squats, ab work, crunches, leg raises. The push-ups and squats were plyometric, so I was putting a bit of a jump into them. And yeah, straight into my stretches. That's a full body stretch done. Takes me about 30 to 40 minutes, 45-second hold. My voice, oh my goodness. But anyway, next workout won't be till Wednesday afternoon because I've got work in the mornings now. Until then, alright, thanks for watching and commenting and following, and thanks for the 20 crunches. Take care.